Welcome to the Bulwark podcast. I'm Shelley Sykes. It's January 20th, 2022. So, do you remember where you were 1 year ago today? What you were doing, Tim Miller? Do you remember that?
I
Do you
was
remember that
crying.
guy?
I was
No.
crying, I think, watching
Happy
that
tears,
orange
happy.
happy tears. I'm kind of like I'm crying this morning after watching Nikola Jokic. I was up late last night watching Nikola Jokic, just beautiful 49-point triple-double game-winning pass, which has me, a little cloudy this morning, but I'm ready for this. And it was a similar type of happy tears, but even more flowing last year, watching that butterscotch bronzered just piece of garbage have to fly away. I was just watching him fly away, and then I came right here to the same room I'm in to talk about it with you on the podcast. It's kind of an emotional podcast, as I recall. Maybe I should have re-listened to it.
There was a lot of drinking during the podcast.
There
Remember? You
was
remember? I actually wore a tuxedo on the podcast for a Zoom call. But so this seems like a long, long, long time
It
ago.
does.
A lot
Dude,
of,
it's only been a year?
a lot of broken, hopes and dreams and all of it. But I want to cling to that image. I actually went back and I was looking at my, the pictures that I took and some of the images, and
Yeah.
and it doesn't get old seeing him, this little man walking out of the White House to get into the helicopter. The leaving the White House. I wanted to watch it on a loop. So for people who say, "Well, you have buyer's remorse about Joe Biden," I've been disappointed by a lot of things, but no, absolutely not. Not even a scintilla, because Donald Trump had to do that walk of shame. Didn't go to the inauguration. I mean,
So
as
good.
petulant as possible. Remember to give that weird rambling speech at the airport. Have a nice life, people. And then he
What a
gets on.
child.
Yeah.
As honestly, as one of the no, buyer's remorse, are you kidding me? It was one of the 5
No.
happiest days of my life. I'm not gonna rank them. Every time I rank the happiest days of my life, my husband gets mad about
No.
where he falls on the list, but, it was up there, one of the 5 happiest days of my life, and
No.
such a child, and he could have done like, no dignity. I always do look back in these images, you get these assholes, the anti-Trump assholes on Twitter who are like, "Well, the Democrat." I'm sure we'll get into this about the press
Yeah.
conference too. "The Democrats tried to delegitimize the thing," and I'm always like, here's the
No.
picture of Obama sucking it up and sitting down next to Donald fucking Trump 2 days after he won in the White House. Like, here's the picture of all the staff looking like they want to cry and being sad, watching Donald Trump come into the White House. We don't have those pictures because what we got to watch was the just man baby just, going home to play with his toys, shuffling out of the White House with his diaper on and flying back to Mar-a-Lago because he just didn't have the, cojones to show up, to shake his
Yeah.
hand, shake the
Which
next guy's
everybody else,
hand.
yeah, you think about it, it's maybe up until then we had taken it for granted. Herbert
Yeah,
Hoover
seriously.
sitting there next to Franklin Delano Roosevelt. That must have been a lot of fun, right?
Seriously.
Harry Truman and Dwight Eisenhower did not get along. Trust me. These moments where, Lyndon Johnson, Richard Nixon, right? They were there.
My
He was
God,
still alive.
yeah.
Yeah. You can imagine. Just think about it. Al Gore sitting there with George W. Bush, George H.W. Bush sitting there with Bill Clinton, this snot-nosed kid from Arkansas who had just defeated him, one-term president. And there he was sitting there. Not only did he suck it up and sit there, but he wrote that really gracious letter on the
Yeah.
way out, which of course it's utterly impossible to imagine Trump doing it. And maybe we don't care about that anymore. Well, I mean, again, and Richard Nixon sitting with John F. Kennedy, and there is Donald Trump heading off by himself. Okay, so
Listen,
I have
Lewis,
a lot.
thank you for making me think about this.
I know.
I'd forgotten about my joy of that morning, and I'm
No.
on a little high now right now. I'm on a cloud just sort of
Well, I'm going
remembering
to bring
myself.
you. Enjoy this while you can. Okay,
Okay.
I just figured we'd back into this because I have a number of favorite stories this morning, including I've been anxiously waiting for the reaction from Mar-a-Lago to the Supreme Court's spanking of Donald
Schlonging.
Trump. Yeah, schlonging, saying, yeah, you do not have the right to. We're not going to go along with your attempt to obstruct the investigation into your behavior on January 6th. 7-1. Only Clarence Thomas, asterisk there, um, because the word recusal is going to come up enough. Clarence
Mhm.
Thomas, husband of Ginny Thomas,
Pro
who is
coup.
a pro coup. I mean, not only pro coup, but as I pointed out earlier
Blotter.
this week, she'd signed a letter just in the last month saying that Adam Kinzinger and Liz Cheney should be expelled from the House GOP conference because they're serving on the committee. And so, look, I do think you ought to give a lot of leeway to what spouses do, right? Your spouse does not speak for you. You should not be held accountable. On the other hand, you know, her name is very likely to show up in some of these documents, in some of
Oh,
this
yes.
testimony. And so there's Clarence Thomas going, up. I think we got to cover it up. Absolutely not. No, I don't think we should turn it over. If that is not a conflict of interest, what the fuck is? Really? So anyway, the gnashing of teeth because of Kavanaugh and Gorsuch and even Amy Coney Barrett. And all of them said, "Yeah, we're not gonna be part of the cover up. We may go along with you on abortion, a variety of other stuff, whatever, mandates, but on this, no, we don't even wanna get close to it."
Yeah,
That
I'll say I don't it
gotta
is it
hurt.
is joyful because he doesn't he doesn't get it. He
No,
really
and
he
he
still
never
didn't get
will.
it, and it has his loyalty expectation that is deformed and privileged and, based on, his childhood and, the deals that he always screwed people over on as a real estate man. He doesn't get it. And look, Amy Coney Barrett would not have been my first choice for a Supreme Court justice, and Brett Kavanaugh isn't really my cup of tea. But and the Gorsuch seat was basically stolen, so I wouldn't have said that originally, but it was if you balance Gorsuch and Coney Barrett, so I have my problems with them, but he didn't understand for the start that he was not, the deal that he had cut, the deal with the devil, between Leonard Leo and the Federalist Society and Trump, that the Republican establishment would go full throat for him as long as he signed off on these judges. He still thought that these judges were going to be on the
He
team,
did.
like wearing a
Right. Yeah.
jersey. Like he didn't understand that all these people did have pre-existing actual principles and beliefs, and even if you disagree with some of their principles and beliefs, and I think uh, correctly were worried, when he was running that he would, appoint Judge Jeanine or whatever to the Supreme Court.
Next
And
time around.
he had
Yeah.
to cut that deal because he wanted to demonstrate that he was pro life, whatever, and make sure he could get the social conservatives on board during the primary. Next time around, I think he has learned his lesson on that point for sure.
Yeah, the
He's got to
question
be
is whether,
pissed.
the Senate would let him get away with it, which of course they
Good point.
probably would. Okay, so here's my second favorite story of the day,
Yeah.
not the most important story, but I just find it highly entertaining. This is from Politico Playbook. Trump's big lie of a gift. Every House Republican, every single one of them, received a present Wednesday from Donald Trump's outside group Save America. They handed out copies of, are you ready for this? Molly Hemingway's conspiratorial book Rigged: How the Media, Big Tech, and the Democrats Seized Our Election, along with a signed note from the former president. So here's Donald Trump flogging Molly Hemingway's book, to push the big lie. And he writes on the note, Republican leadership should never have certified the election on January 6th. Still there. And now Democrats will never stop their assault on America, Trump writes. I hope you find this book informative and encouraging in your battle for the heart of our nation. Political playbook notes. Well, Kevin McCarthy led more than 100 House Republicans in objecting to the election that day. The GOP leader has been trying to pivot away from 2020, right, and focus on Biden ahead of the midterms. But as a House GOP aide who tipped us off said, Trump's gift is the latest sign that the leader of the party does not want that and expects House Republicans to fall in line. Just shows how Trump is continuing to pressure members and Republicans to embrace the big lie, the person said. So, first of all, Molly Hemingway must be so proud since she's become a
Serenity
total show.
now.
Well, okay. And she actually, okay, yeah, this is now I'm gonna go down a
All
rabbit
right,
hole.
I'm ready.
Could you say I'm here from Milwaukee, and we're the home of the Bradley Foundation, which used to be one of the real pillars of the intellectual conservative movement here, funded almost every single conservative thinker, book, think tank, university, you name it. And
I have a prediction. I don't know what's happened to the Bradley Foundation, but I bet it's been degraded and become a
well,
MAGA
well, let,
cesspool.
let me tell you how bad it's become a mega cesspool. Okay, and I need to. I mean, in quasi Full disclosure, my wife used to work there. I had close ties with them. I knew a lot of the folks. Was really good friends with former presidents of it, but it has become a mega cesspool. And here's the measure of it: every year they hand out the so-called Bradley Prize, which is this big sort of crystal lion with a big freak load of money that goes with it. And it used to be people like George Will who would win that. This year, are you ready? They gave it to Molly Hemingway. I mean, this is okay. I'm now.
Mm,
What, are you working on the Serenity here?
I'm breathing.
This is a $250,000 prize, and it used to be to the most important, thoughtful conservatives in the country, and they gave it to Molly Hemingway, who is such an embarrassing shill that Trump is using her books to send out telling Congress that they shouldn't have certified January 6th. So this tells you a lot about how deep in the cesspool. I mean, not only are they deep in the cesspool, I mean, they're stirring the cesspool. Cleta Mitchell was a member of the board of the Bradley Foundation. I don't know whether she still is. Remember, she was the attorney who actually
Yeah.
was on the call trying to overturn the Georgia election. So anyway,
Well, I'm just
there's
doing my Ujjayi breaths over here, Charlie. It is a little bit confusing, I do think that I recalled that Liz Cheney lost her role in leadership because she just couldn't move
she
on.
wouldn't move on. She couldn't move on. So
It is disturbing that it's just worth mentioning, like, and just driving home this point, because I do think since and we will have, as Kinzinger, previewed on this very podcast
new
a few
dad,
days ago, new
congratulations.
dad,
Yeah, yeah.
congrats, Adam, that there will be some primetime hearings, and there will be other news opportunities. But I do think that for people who aren't following this closely, like, there's this underbelly of continuing on the 2020 insurrection, that is ongoing and that is just not getting the attention that what's happening, sensibly, in the White House, in people's day-to-day lives, like what the urgent matters, right? Like the things that are affecting people today are getting more attention. And so, these little tidbits happen. You see that the former president's sending a book to everybody in the House, reminding them to stay in line and say that the 2020 election is rigged. He's holding this rally in Arizona, where, the My Pillow man who had the most crazy insurrection conspiracies and who met with the White House and told them to, call the National Guard in. He's speaking. This is still a man in good standing. He's speaking in the lead up to Trump's speech. All of the leading polling candidate for Senate and governor is there, right? Like, this stuff is all still happening and ongoing. It just, because we don't have an election right now, and because I think a lot of people are wish casting that maybe Trump will, like, keel over or get arrested or whatever, that we won't ever have to deal with this. But it's very much a present thing, not a past thing. And the book is it's just a little example, but it's just one more data point in that regard.
No, it is, and I would urge people, by the way, to read Amanda Carpenter's piece in the Bulwark today. She breaks down the the different ways in which Trump tried to overturn the election. I mean, at a certain point, you almost need a chart, all of the things that are going on. Okay, so let's take a deep breath here. It is 1 year, and Joe Biden does the quote unquote reset press conference. As I wrote this morning, the optics weren't great because, I mean, it is bracketed by dismal polling, inter-party squabbling, and this historic failure on voting rights. I continue to be baffled by the Democratic strategy in the Senate, which succeeded, I think, primarily in exposing really bitter divisions inside the party. Rather than amplifying the fact that the Republicans are blockading voting rights, and so president comes out, talks about his first year, and the next news cycle is, his agenda crashes and burns in the Senate. It's great, and then there's these polls out showing, well, I mean, they're just not good. So before I go into the slough of negativity and despond, Tim, your thoughts, because I think you had a more positive take on the press conference than I did.
Yeah, well, on the press conference. So I guess I just want to bracket my comments by saying I agree, and we've been saying on this podcast and on others that I've been concerned about some of the president's strategic moves, the Democratic Party's strategic moves. If people haven't read Sarah Longwell's article yesterday talking about the strategic pivot Democrats need to make to deal with their political reality, they should read it. This is not a Pollyannish comment about the Democrats' current political position, which is maybe not dire, but not good. The press conference itself, though, I thought was pretty good. I don't so here's my context. I need to give you a little context to this.
Ugh.
I couldn't watch it yesterday in real time. I was running out and about. I had some toddler parenting, to attend to, and so I'm watching it on Twitter, right? And I'm seeing everybody, all the sturm and drang about his Ukraine comment, all the everybody's upset about his elections comment. People are saying he's doddering. I found, I suffered through right wing Twitter. They had all of these, performative things that they were upset about at the press conference, and I was like, man, geez, Biden he mustn't have really performed. But I knew it was coming on the podcast, so it's like I can't judge this based on Twitter. So after watching Nikola Jokic late at night, I sat silently in my room and I watched him on 1.75 speed on the YouTube. So maybe I just want to say that I might be giving him a curve. He might sound more doddering when he's in real time. I was listening to him on 1.75, and I powered through the whole 2 hours. And I thought he was really good. He was
If you
generally
could just
optimistic.
always speed him up like that.
A
Well,
couple of the
if
lifts.
it only he could be electronically enhanced that way all the
If we
time.
could if we could put him on chipmunks mode,
Yeah.
then he'd be good. Okay,
Ah,
a couple things I just wrote down. I said on this podcast, probably 2 or 3 months ago, that they need to pivot and start focusing on inflation and stop focusing so much on, their big ticket spending items. He did that. He even mentioned deficit reduction, during this press conference yesterday. He in both his lead up remarks and his response to the questions, he kept coming back to how they're trying to deal with inflation. I think he's done a good job of making the point that BBB, it might not be addressing grocery store inflation, but prescription drugs, childcare, elder care. I thought at least they have internalized that. This is a message that they have to deal with. Because they don't. It's not like they have a magic end inflation wand. The best thing they can do is talk about the levers they can do to pull it. He talked about Jerome Powell. I thought that he was pretty good on schools. He talked about how all the money that they've given the schools and how some of them aren't using it very wisely. I was kind of a dig at the teachers union. I thought could have been a little more direct, but
yes.
he kept reiterating that he wanted schools to be open. I know we're going to talk about this a little bit more later, but I just thought he wanted to mention it. He was good on actually. I think that they have settled on an anti-Republican message that they're driving in addition to the Trump stuff, because Trump alone isn't good enough, as we saw in Virginia. And it's, what do these guys want to do? They have no plan either. Yeah, he kept repeating that. He kept coming back to this message, which is correct. Republicans are offering nothing. They're just criticizing Biden and not wanting to come to the table. I thought his message was good on it.
And by the way, McConnell underlined that because they asked him a little bit later, "So what is your agenda?" And he goes, "Hey, that's a great question, but you'll have to wait until we get back in control," or something like, "What? Wait, seriously? That's your answer? That
Yeah.
we don't have it, and you have to, like, put us in power, and then we will tell you what it's going to be, because you know what it's going to be. It's just going to be obstruction." I mean, it's just like he doesn't even think about Mitch McConnell is he doesn't even bullshit about it. It's just like,
No,
"Yeah, we're just gonna block
we're just gonna
everything."
block
So,
everything.
next question, like, I mean, what part of everything don't you get? Well, so
So
I
yeah,
don't know.
I thought that's is that a good enough as a message going into November? Probably not. We can talk about that, but at least it's something. He's starting to define the opposite side, which he's not done a particularly good job of. And little things. I thought he was tough on China on versus a couple questions. He got some crazy. He took crazy questions from, like, not just Fox, but like Newsmax and some other troll guy who asked him about Hunter Biden. And he kept his cool. He answered those questions, and he was up there for 2 hours, which, I don't want to make a big deal out of that, but it's not nothing. Okay, it's
Well,
it's
no,
not. I'd
right.
like to see some of these other people go, who are calling him doddering, take 2 hours worth of questions from assholes and see how they do. So I thought overall he was good on the two items that people keep coming back to. Now, communication is a big part of the job, right? So you need to be a clear communicator if you're the president, and if you can't be a clear communicator, you deserve to be criticized. So I'm fine with him being criticized. But what was going around on Twitter was very much not what he said on either of those points, right? On the 2022 legitimacy election point, he was trying to make the point about the count. He kept trying to say like, well, how do we know if the Republicans are going to monkey with the count? And I think he got frustrated
Mm.
with Wegman, and Psaki cleared that up today. Here's what he said on Ukraine. I wrote this down. He's never seen sanctions like the one I promise will be imposed if he moves. Number one, the idea that NATO is not going to be united, I don't buy. I want to be clear with you. Serious imposition of sanctions, devastating impact on Russia if there's Russian forces crossing the border, killing Ukrainians. If there's Russian forces crossing the border, killing Ukrainians, devastating sanctions. Okay, so look, I'm not Shea Kateri or any of our, esteemed foreign policy greats, who've gotten everything wrong over the past 30 years. So maybe they didn't like the specific wording that he used on that. The minor incursion thing, I guess, obviously,
I would
The
tell you,
Ukrainians didn't like it, so it couldn't have been good. But I don't know. I read that,
I
and
I
it's like to
I
me, it says if Putin sends troops over, we're gonna fuck them up. That's what I saw.
I
That's what I read.
I admire your heroic effort there.
Okay.
I stand in awe of that. No, I would say, see, that is what I wish he would have said and then stop.
Right. Sure.
Instead, you have the, well, as long as it's a minor incursion, which whatever that means.
It's a
Look,
weird
I mean,
phrase.
there are gaffes, then there are gaffes that are just, whatever, maybe telling too much truth in Michael Kinsley definition of a gaff, or just, mixing up some words. And then there are the gaffes that might actually lead to war. Gaffes that might actually lead to miscalculation, send the wrong signal. And by the way, it's not just Twitter, it's the Ukrainians who are going, what
Yeah.
the fuck did he just say? He just gave a green light. Fred Kaplan, wrote about this. I mean, this again, Biden suggesting if Putin mounts a minor incursion, then maybe NATO might not be so united. And Fred Kaplan writes, so is Biden saying that Russia might not incur severe costs and significant harm if Putin mounts merely a whatever a minor incursion is? And what is a minor incursion? Just another salami slice of eastern Ukraine beyond Russia's 2014 minor incursion into Donbas province, and it's that if you pronounce it that way, and the annexation of Crimea, just a helicopter landing in the capital, just a few airstrikes. And of course, we had the immediate White House cleanup, on aisle 48 here, and Jen Psaki put out a statement, saying that he's been clear with the Russian president, if there's a
This
renewed
is a tick. This is
invasion.
a PR flag tick, by the way. Anytime your boss fucks up and is unclear,
eh,
you always
yeah,
have to say, "We've always been clear" in the
we've
cleanup
absolutely
statement.
no, and it was not clear, and it was an own goal. But it's one of those things where, with all of his experience, it was, I'm sorry, just kind of breathtaking that he would have wandered off into that, because this was exactly the moment for complete clarity and not throwing into, now if you do something really big, I don't know, maybe a minor incursion, but if it's really big,
Yeah.
you might be in trouble. Minor incursion, I'll get back to you on. I said, you don't say that.
Can I tell you what I think he was thinking? And I agree with you. I don't want
Yeah.
to make this seem like I'm saying this was perfectly done. My point I was trying to make is I think the rest of the press conference was good,
Okay.
and I think on these 2 points, he just mangled what he's trying to say, which is different than I think a lot of the criticism that I saw, which made it seem like this was intentional. I
Well,
think what's going on in his head is Syria, and I think that the Obama red line, is something that sticks with him. And he followed up right after the incursion comment, which with I didn't write this down, but some kind of line saying, if you're the big power, you can't bluff, right? You have to back up what you say. And I think that he was trying to caveat because he doesn't want to seem like, oh, I'm guaranteeing we're going to take a big action, and then if something little happens and I don't take anything, then you're going to say I was, I think that's what's going through his head. He worded it poorly, but he did come back. I just want to reiterate this because it was after the minor incursion comment. They followed up, and it was after that is when he came back and he said that if there's Russian forces crossing the border killing Ukrainians, there will be devastating impact. So
yeah, that
to
would
me,
not
like
be
that's what he
minor.
said after. That would not be right. That would not be minor. So I guess his point is like, okay, uh, there are a whole suite of things Russia could do in Ukraine that is short of, you know killing somebody and crossing the border, right? And so it's, who the hell knows what all
Okay,
those
so
things
that was
are, right? And I think that's what he was trying to say in his head. Like, if Russia, does a little side, whatever, like, I don't want to be hamstrung into the most severe pushback on Russia, if they're just monkeying around.
okay, so that's number 1. Let's
Okay.
let's talk about the other
All right.
one, where he's asked about the legitimacy of the midterm. We have some of the audio of that. Let's
Okay.
just
Yeah.
play.
Speaking of voting rights legislation, if this isn't passed, do you still believe the upcoming election will be fairly conducted and its results will be legitimate?
Well, it all depends on uh, whether or not we're able to make the case to the American people that some of this is being set up to try to alter the outcome of the election.
Okay, and I'm not going to say it's going to be legit. When he was asked about the possibility of fraud, the prospect of an illegitimate election is in direct proportion to us being able to get these reforms passed. Look, Josh Jordan tweeted out, "Look, I was against Trump preemptively claiming the election would be illegitimate if he lost, and I'm against Biden saying that 2022 could be illegitimate if he doesn't get his election bills passed, which he's not going to. Until we have evidence of illegitimate elections, these are dangerous accusations. Here's my concern, and we talk about Twitter. The number of people out there going, he's absolutely right, tells me that we are really in danger of going into this doom loop in which everybody questions everything, that both sides now have armed themselves with reasons not to respect the outcome of the election. We know the Republicans will come up with any bullshit lie out there, but the Democrats are now convincing themselves that the election, if they lose, it will be illegitimate because the Republicans suppressed the vote and they cheated. And so we are in this kind of doom loop right now where everybody is sort of pre-positioned for illegitimacy. And that's why that wasn't just a gaffe. I think that felt like a preview of the world that we're going to be living in for the next few years.
I think that's a very legitimate concern. And I think that this is, again, to my point, in my defense of the press conference rant, I I do think that he was talking about the count. Okay, now and not, if
He
there's
didn't say
suppression or
that.
whatever. But he kind of he did. That was a shorter
Yeah,
clip. He did. Okay,
yeah.
I think so. Regard if he doesn't though, this needs to be an issue that you are particularly sensitive to the exact language that you're using because of what happened in January, and because of this point that you said, future people not accepting elections. I'm very, I think there's good reason to be very concerned about this. I do think that this is an area where there is a little bit of irrationality that is consuming folks on the left. Sometimes I get these questions and about the dire state of voting rights, and it's again, what Republicans are doing in the states is not good. It also hasn't demonstrated to work yet. And so yet is a key word. We'll see. Maybe in 2022, some of these red states there will be real suppression. In 2020, it didn't work at all, right? Record turnout. There are plenty of opportunities to vote. And limiting the number of early days again. Not that's not what I'm for, but that's not you know that's not doesn't make an election illegitimate. For a long time, we had elections that had very few opportunities to vote early or absentee. So um, anyway, point being, he needs to be precise in his language about this. I'm concerned about the left not accepting elections. I don't want to create an equivalence, though, because I think that what Republicans are doing in the states is terrible. I think there is legitimate concern about secretaries of state and other officials in red states, learning from Trump and trying to screw with the count. I think that's a perfectly appropriate red flag to put up. And
But
I
that's
think
the
that
important.
he's just got to watch what he says.
This is the really important distinction here because I think that is the real threat. So when I say there's an existential threat to democracy, I am talking about January 6th and the entire plot to overthrow that election, the installation of secretaries of states who might throw out vast numbers of votes, legislatures that feel empowered to ignore the popular vote. These are fundamental dangers. None of the bills that were voted on neither of the bills that were voted on yesterday actually dealt with that. See, this is the disconnect here. That the problem is there's a problem of casting the votes, access to the vote, and then there's the problem of counting the votes. The real problem, the existential problem, is in the counting of the votes. The casting of the votes, look, I understand the people in Georgia who are upset about the elimination of the drop box. I understand why they are concerned about really long lines to vote in Fulton County. I get this, okay? But these are not drop boxes are not an existential threat to democracy. 15 days of early voting as opposed to 10 days of early voting is not an existential issue for democracy. The
Yeah. It's
overthrowing
just a
of the
bad
election
policy,
is
right?
it's a bad law. And
Right.
could I also point out about the Voting Rights Act? And look, I've said before, I would have voted for the John Lewis Act. I wouldn't have voted for HR1 because they pack all kinds of other extraneous stuff in it. But I would have voted for it. But people do need to be reminded that we still have a Voting Rights Act. What the Supreme Court threw out, they gutted a portion of the Voting Rights Act, which required, pre-clearance of any major changes in certain southern states. Okay. But it is still illegal, unconstitutional to discriminate on the basis of race. If any state takes a step that endangers the votes of Americans, particularly of minorities, there is still a federal law that bans that. There are still litigation. You can still sue. You can still go and enforce it. So the loss of preclearance is a problem, but it does not completely eliminate the voting right. And I guess part of it is this, and I'm sorry to keep coming back to this, the disconnect between the rhetoric and the actual reality, because I had to spend some time yesterday going, okay, specifically, what are we talking about here? What am I missing? Is it the, that you can't hand out water to people in line? Well, that's just kind of petty. What's going on in Texas? They're throwing out some votes. But the reality is that by any measure, at least you tell me if I'm wrong about this, it seems like it's easier to vote pretty much everywhere in the country, easier to vote than it was in, say, 2008 when Barack Obama was first elected president. Am I wrong about that?
Yeah, I'd have to go look into. I
Yeah,
think
yeah,
certainly that's true if you said 1988, right?
yeah.
And so I think that's sort of the point, right? In a post Voting Rights Act world, there was still a lot, significantly more restrictive voting rules, in the past quarter century than there is now. I think that's true. Obviously they're trying to roll back certain things. I don't agree with that. I think Democrats should particularly be worried about expanding them in purple states where they have control, places like Michigan right now. But yeah, I don't think that's right.
Mm,
I think that the rhetoric on this is overheated. There's good reason after what happened on January 6th to be upset, but then to sort of conflate that with all of these other items about voting,
mm,
there are legitimate reasons to want to disagree with. To be honest, I had long held the view that we had too long early voting period. Things can happen in elections at the end of time, and my position had always been, election day should be a holiday. Everybody should be able to, get off work and go vote on election day. And if your boss doesn't let you, you should be able to sue them, right? Like election day should be a holiday, and that would solve it, right? So I think that there are good faith disagreements. I don't think what the Republicans are doing in a lot of these states is good faith. I think it's bad faith.
no,
And
it's
it's
very
based
bad
on the
faith. I
2020.
agree.
But
Right.
okay, their intentions being bad, yeah, it doesn't change the reality that you just laid out of the fact that these changes are rolling back people's access to voting to what it was more like 20 years ago, which again I just want to keep reiterating I do not support, but that is different than not having a free and fair election. And that is why I try this on for size. Like the Biden message should be, we will have free and fair elections. I will make sure we have free and fair elections, and all the Republicans' attempts to try to undermine that, must be rebuked, and we
With
will
the full
stop
force
them.
of law. Yes.
Yeah, with the full force law, period. And so you attack them still, but reassure people.
Well, exactly. I mean, there are still tools, and the Department of Justice can sue like they are in Texas. Okay, so Governor Youngkin in Virginia.
My friend.
Based on the Twitters, you've been saying some things that are a little controversial.
Boy,
I need to catch up on this.
I don't think that this is controversial, actually, Charlie.
Okay. All right.
I think it's controversial in the sense that some people are upset. But here's what I'm concerned about, and I just want to back up a little bit before I get into my controversial, defense of something that Glenn Youngkin did, which I'm sure is not very popular among my
Huh?
new friends.
Huh.
The Republicans in some ways, this parallels this voting rights discussion. The Republicans' actions on COVID have been absolutely unconscionable. And I sent this tweet yesterday. I don't know if you've seen it about the Utah Senate president. This asshole who's this Republican Senate president in Utah who tested positive for COVID, shows up to work, doesn't wear a mask, first lies about the fact that he tested positive for COVID, then later has to admit that he did test positive twice and he still showed up. Uh, this is just a microcosm of Republicans' behavior across the country. Appeasing the anti-vaxxers, in some cases, DeSantis' case, hiring an anti-vax, a certain general in the state. Their behavior has been
Yeah.
horrible, and yet somehow I I sense, talking to my non-political friends, looking at the data, the Democrats are letting Republicans take the middle position on a lot of COVID things, particularly as it relates to schools, and particularly as it relates to, trying to transition back towards having a path to transition back towards some kind of normality, not pre-COVID normality, but some kind of normality. And I think that the Democrats are making a big mistake here. Like, they should be turning Republicans into the crazy ones because they are crazy and they're acting crazy. And yet, because of the behavior in schools, I really think that they're opening themselves up to being the ones that people are upset at. And this prime example is this mask fight among kids in schools. And I want to be clear. I think that when people are inside in close quarters, they should be wearing a mask, right? And given right now what's happening with Omicron and vulnerable communities, I totally agree with that. But the treatment of the kids in the schools right now is a little crazy. I think, having to have separate lunches, masking, permanent masking all the time, masking 8 hours a day. And I mentioned this on the Next Level podcast. So if you already heard this, you can fast forward 30 seconds. If you haven't heard it, sign up for Bulwark Plus. But you see these pictures of the grown-ups, going to sporting events. Nobody's wearing masks. Everybody's inside. Everybody's partying. Everybody's having a good time. Democrats and Republicans, by the way. This isn't just Republicans. And then you contrast that with the pictures of the kids walking through the schools, like they're in a prison, having to mask. I get that, wearing a mask isn't that big of a sacrifice, but man, like, these kids, they're at the lowest risk of anybody of COVID, and we're making them wear masks 8 hours a day. It's tough. My
It
kid
is
is
tough.
4. It's fine. It's fine. She's fine. But
Yeah.
you're learning your phonics, right? Not seeing people's mouths does matter, right? Like, if you're learning how to read, not being able to read the lips of your teacher, like, that does matter. It's harder to learn new words. It's harder to understand what's being said. And I do feel like it's the Democrats are opening themselves up to a major criticism by saying that, schools, and I thought Biden did a good job saying schools should be open, but at the local level, sometimes he gets stuck having to respond to local actions. At local levels, if some of these schools are closing, these kids are wearing masks, and then you've got Republican candidates saying, man, if a parent says the kid doesn't want to wear a mask, they should. I think that's a winning political message for the Republicans and for Youngkin right now. And unfortunately, the irresponsible actors are starting to encroach into the big middle on this issue that is very important to people's day-to-day lives. It's tangible. There are people who don't want, to have to stay home and skip work for a day to take care of their kids, and that's
And
different than
it
democracy, right? That's intangible.
exactly. There are two different categories of, like, things that people think about in theory and then really tangible.
Right.
Gas prices, really tangible. The price of chicken, really tangible. Whether your kid has to wear a mask all day, whether your kid gets to go to school. So as I'm listening to this discussion about the masking, I feel the anger rising in me once again about the anti-vaxxers, the people who have been so reckless, the people who have given out disinformation. And I guess that's where you're going, is that the pivot on this is to say, look, children should be in school. They should not have to wear masks. And the reason that we are even having this discussion is because there has been so much reckless disinformation about the vaccine. The vaccines work. We need to stop having Republican governors lying about this. undermining our efforts to do the healthy thing. The thing that makes it is so irrational about the education debate is the fact, and you know this, every parent knows this, there are so many immunizations that you have to have. There are so many shots. In the state of Florida, it takes up an entire page of the website,
Yes.
all of the shots you have to have, even to take your child to daycare. So why do we suddenly have this carve out and say, yes, but absolutely not this one vaccine that may determine whether or not we have school at all? This is the bullshit. So I do think they need to go on offense about the vaccines as opposed to getting bogged down in this other thing. The only reason we're talking about masks is because you assholes are not vaccinating.
Yes. And by the
No.
way, if there are certain times like, look, I don't, they're high risk things. We're having a school function. Everybody's, we're singing, Christian Catholic schools, like we're having mass, right? Maybe people should have their masks on, right? Like there are reasonable actions. If you're within a certain, if you tested positive and, then you come back a few days later, the kids, right? Like there are all of these rational, reasonable things that we can do, no, and that turns the Republicans into the ones that are extreme because they are, right? Like you guys are risking people's lives. Like the answer is not, oh, laissez-faire, live and let die, whatever, versus like COVID zero, right? Like there's this question of how do we transition out of it, and who can take the big middle, and I think that if the Democrats, uh, you know like chose to, they could do that, but there needs to be a little leadership and a little
Yeah.
bit of risk, and willing to say, hey, we need to let people who have done the right thing, who've gotten vaccinated, um, have a little bit of leeway to be responsible, but also reasonable. And I think it's unreasonable to demand that 6-year-olds who are vaccinated, who are at very low risk, who are trying to learn
Well,
how to read, have their
exactly.
mask on 8 hours a day, while grown-ups don't.
No, I completely agree. So, all right. So you tweeted out 13 hours ago
Okay,
a
I
thought
do a lot of
experiment.
tweets.
I know, but this was thought provoking.
Yeah, thanks.
You asked an interesting question. And I think it's legitimate because people are saying, boy, this has been a really a tough year for Joe Biden. It's been a terrible year for Joe Biden, which it has been. But then you asked a thought exercise on the Biden 1 year mark. What is the best calendar year for a president in the post 9/11 internet era? You got 20 to choose from. Hmm.
It's tough, isn't it? Everybody think
Well,
about that for a second.
there is a correct answer, but I I'm guessing that your point was as you go through it, you realize there has not been since really in this in this century, there hasn't been really a good year for a president. They've been like various shades of shitty, right?
Yeah.
Okay, shitty, but you survived it. But when was the last time a president had a really good year?
I think
There's
that
writing.
yeah, I think there's the right answer. I probably should have started at 2003, but, rather than
Yeah.
2002, because 2002 is probably the right answer,
That
with
is
Bush.
the right answer.
Um,
Yes.
though,
Get
2011,
myself.
I think you can make a pretty decent case for
Yeah.
2011. We killed Osama bin Laden and got out of Iraq, but he didn't do a whole lot. The Republicans had just taken over the House, so there wasn't a lot of legislative achievement that year. But 2011 would be
Oh, I
my
remember that
runner-up.
pain. See, I don't know. I that was if you're the president, you've just lost control of
Right.
Congress. You have the Tea Party that is raging. All bipartisan negotiation has
So
stopped. I remember the economy being so crappy that by the end of the year, one prominent Republican was saying, if Republicans can't beat Obama next year, they ought to get out of this business because things are going so badly about
was
all of
that
this.
Sarlee Kikes
No, it
that
wasn't.
said
It
that?
was it was it was, it was somebody. No, somebody else. I wish I would have said that, even though it would have been wrong. But so you agree with me because I actually spent some time on this, and I came up with 2002. When you think about the last, really strong year for a president, I mean George
Yeah.
W. Bush, so had a shaky election, shaky first year. The country came together after 9/11. He was able to actually win in the midterm elections. There was
Yeah.
a sense of national purpose, of national unity. Things, of course, went south with Iraq later, with Iraq and
Well,
Afghanistan.
they
But
weren't in
but
Iraq yet even. They went
right,
into
right,
Iraq
right.
early
I mean,
2003.
they went later. But I'm saying, but in 2002, the country did have there was that moment when I think you had that national that sort of national purpose, national unity that seems like a different era. I just don't know that we could ever get back to that again.
This is 19
You
years
know?
ago, right? I
I
mean,
know
that's what I'm
19,
saying.
yeah.
So now if you start the thought exercise in 2003, it's like, man, someone else offered Obama the 2015 year because, you get gay marriage and stuff. But again, he doesn't accomplish anything really that year legislatively. And then Trump comes 2016, right? So it's like, how great could it have been, really? Um, so I think that some of this speaks to deeper challenges about like the internet and the way we consume news and the divide in our country, right? Like, is it possible to have a good presidency, in a
Well,
time
that's
when
a
you don't have three, news networks with the sort of scrutiny of the day to day internet stuff? Maybe that the internet is a big part of it. The divides, post 9/11. Some of the choices of our leaders obviously have created this, but you pick a year and then you
I
look
know
at the
it's hard.
previous 20 years, you go from 81 to 2001, and it's like the best year from 2000 for a president from 2001 to 2021 is like in the bottom 5 years from 81 to 2001. I mean, so they have mostly good years. Bush had a bad year right before he loses, and Clinton has a bad year when he got in trouble with his little pickle. And but like a lot of good years for the presidents. Obviously, they made some mistakes with the benefit of hindsight and all that. Not saying that those guys were perfect, but the culture, the political environment was just so different then than now. And
Well,
to me, I just think that that puts a little bit of a broader context on Biden's struggles.
this is a very interesting question, is whether you can have a successful presidency anymore, and also, but what defines a successful presidency? Again, this is one of those things, and I was, thinking about if I had to give a letter grade to Joe Biden. I'm still working on this. Do you evaluate a presidency based on the policy issues? I mean, look, I mean, I understand the people who would say, look, he got the big stimulus package through, which was a significant legislative accomplishment, the infrastructure bill through, which in Earth 2.0, the Republicans, Democrats would be saying, this has really been a good year. Look at this, these $1 trillion pieces of legislation. Job market is good. The economy appears to be good. So there are these measurements, these metrics of presidential success. But then you have the sense, yet, then why do people feel so shitty? Why do they not have a sense of optimism? Why do they not think the country is headed in the right direction? Because that's also determines whether or not you feel can you be a successful president if people are not feeling good about the country and the
Right.
direction the country is going? So, do you
And is
judge
that
the president
possible?
based on the metrics or the policy, or do you judge him based on the mood? And by the way, mood is not. I'm not trying to trivialize it. I'm saying that there. This is the sort of the heart of the Biden failure is that despite some of these policy wins, which are considerable, which Democrats have decided not to celebrate, but the country just doesn't have that sense of hope and optimism that we thought it was going to have this year, right? I
Yeah,
mean,
and I think that there's this question of, is this possible? Are we so
is it
divided,
possible?
right, that you can't have a good mood because 40% of the country is gonna hate you no matter what? Look, it's possible. I think that with the benefit of hindsight, I got a lot of answers to that question. 2002 and 2011 were the most popular ones, but 2010 was also a really popular answer because if you look at 2010, Obama passes Affordable Care Act, passes Dodd-Frank. During the lame duck, they pass don't ask, don't tell. So on paper, particularly if you're left of center, you look at that and you say, I mean, we tried 50 years to pass a healthcare bill. Dodd Frank was important, post crash legislation. Obviously, don't ask, don't tell was long overdue. Uh, okay, but that lame duck happens in the context of just getting absolutely annihilated at the
Yeah.
polls, right? And so I think that it's possible you look back at 2021 with a similar view 10 years on, which is like this COVID relief bill. I don't think people realized how much it helped buoy the economy and, get us, jumpstart us. Maybe it jumpstarted us a little too hot with inflation temporarily, but, prevent the long recovery that we saw during Obama. You look at the infrastructure and think, man, all this stuff, 10 years from now, when you got your new airport built and things like, thank God we did that. Right. But meanwhile, his political standing is dropping the whole time. And
It's yeah,
maybe that's
interesting.
intractable, right?
It
Or
is.
maybe
It
there's
is.
an answer to it. I don't think you don't want to throw in the towel and say there's nothing he could have done. I think there's things Biden could have done better. Obviously, this was not a thought exercise to get him to A+, but I think it does demonstrate that there's something about the structure the gridlock we have in DC and our cultural divide that's making it really hard to have a good year.
Yeah, happiness is not a fixed thing. It's always your circumstances versus your expectations of your circumstances, right? So no matter it's I mean, no matter how good things are, if you thought that they should be so much better, and as you point out, if there are this cacophony of voices constantly tell you things suck, it's
Right.
terrible, and that volume is rising because it's not just the people that are telling you that things could be a lot better, or here's some missed opportunities. It's like your country is going down the tubes. The we it's apocalypse now all the time. And there's a certain anxiety. There is a kind of a disconnect because you kind of look around and you go, hey, my life is actually pretty good, right? I mean, the sun is out, it may be a little bit chilly, people are still moving around the country. Most people have jobs. And if you and by the way, if you're working at a sucky job, you can now, this is a moment where you can quit that sucky job and get a better one that pays good money and all of these things. And yet, what the voice in your head is telling you, it's the end, it's over, everything is terrible, it's carnage. So
And to
I
the
don't know.
point about this getting worse, it's not just getting worse in it's also getting worse in the way that we're communicating. And I think that there are a lot of other things here, but I don't think it's coincidence that the internet, the rise of the web has coincided with this, and making it much more challenging to be a president because of just the amount of information and doom porn that's in people's ears. And I'm telling you, Charlie, like I suck down the Devil's Playground from time to time over on TikTok,
I
and
know.
it's horrible. I mean, like there you don't come across a lot of TikToks that are from teens talking about how great things are going. It is all doom and gloom from both MAGA teens and more progressive teens about how they aren't doing anything and et cetera. So I just think that there's something about our communications tools that are a big contributor to this. That's a little bit
Well,
hard
well,
to figure out how you navigate.
Well, yeah, that's the problem when people say, "What's the solution to it?" It is not easy. I think a lot of people are just simply going to withdraw. You're gonna, go off into the metaverse and never be heard from again. I mean, maybe that's the end point of Western civilization, is we all go into the holodeck and never come out. But
Or
also,
maybe
I mean,
there's a
it's not.
backlash, right, against it, and we have an era of good feelings coming down the pike. No?
I would like to think that. But see, this is the other thing, is there's the technology, which also could bring on the era of good feelings, but there's so much bad faith out there. The bad faith argumentation, the people who have a vested interest in keeping the outrage, it is an industry that thrives on keeping people afraid and angry. And it's upping the ante. This is why I keep coming back to the drug analysis, that you've got people hooked on the heroin. At a certain point, it's not enough. So you have to have, the meth on the street. And then, the competition between who can give you, the stronger meth. And that's really when you think about, Fox News, Newsmax, and OAN, they're competing for sort of the same market, but by, upping the dosage or the potency of the meth that they're peddling on the street. If you're following my analogy,
I do.
my Breaking Bad analogy, America Breaking Bad, or the right Breaking Bad. And
Yeah,
so
do you become
Tucker
addicted
Carlson,
to this stuff? Yeah, then the viewers become addicted to it, right? Like, then it does the calming, response, they turn it off, right? I don't wanna watch this anymore, like, my heart rate's not jacked,
that's right. Yeah, it's not like they're spending too much money. I think they should spend less money. No, it's
Right.
communism,
Right.
or what? Drop boxes are actually a good idea, and there's nothing wrong with them. It's like, no, it's Jim Crow
Mm.
2.0. They're gonna put you all back in chains. Okay, so. What a surprise that we're all on edge 1 year in. I'm not going to wear the tux on the live stream tonight, though. I just got to tell you.
Alright, well, I'm hosting the live stream tonight, and we're
I
gonna get
know.
everybody else's. I've got a lot of thinkers for people, so come
Yeah,
on, join Bulwark Plus, and, I get to turn the tables on Charlie and,
yeah.
make him answer the uncomfortable questions. Plus, there'll be a Nikola Jokic quiz.
Will there be pearl clutching?
There might be pearls tonight, I haven't decided.
Alright, I just wanna know.
I haven't decided yet.
Speaking of pearl clutching, I haven't seen Peggy Noonan on television in a while. It's like, it's like build an entire career out of pearl clutching.
I don't
Hey,
think that she's gonna give me her pearls, sadly. I would like, somebody to bequeath me their pearls, but I think my past comments about Peggy probably are cutting me out of the will.
I think there are probably other candidates out there. Tim Miller, thank you so much for coming on the podcast. Appreciate it very much.
Thanks, Charlie.
And thank you all for listening to today's Bulwark podcast. I'm Charlie Sykes. We will be back tomorrow. We'll do this all over again.